All right, Ms. Potter, so thank you for being here with us. Before we get started, if you would please just introduce yourself and let the people know a little bit more about what you do from your own eyes.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This on? It's been a while since I taught elementary school, and I'm thinking now that in my office I'm going to need to institute some wiggle breaks because I have really been missing that. It definitely gets your blood flowing and makes your brain work better too. So I'm so excited to be here. I've been interested in Blackstone Valley Prep for a few years now. I do research at the Century Foundation that focuses on school diversity issues. And I'm particularly interested in charter schools that have taken it as part of their mission to intentionally build diverse student populations. And Blackstone Valley Prep is an incredible example of this. And I'll start just by giving a brief outline of how I became interested in work and diversity. That I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, actually just outside, and went to public schools there, and schools that really weren't very racially diverse, where the population was majority white students. And then in college, I went to Yale University, and there was actually a lot more racial diversity than I had experienced in my public schools in Virginia. But there really wasn't that much economic diversity, and seeing what the range of students' backgrounds socioeconomically looked like there was a new shock for me. And so when I was teaching after college, it was really important to me to find a school that placed racial and socioeconomic diversity really at the root of their mission. And so I taught at a public charter school in Washington, D.C. called Two Rivers, which is one of relatively few charter schools in that city that brings together a group of students from really different backgrounds. And from that work, I now do education research focusing on school diversity issues, looking at strategies that schools can use, and really highlighting reasons why this is an issue that we should care about, and thinking about the benefits that diverse schools offer for students.
All right, so before we get into some of those benefits, and we'd love to hear a little bit more about them. It's been 60 years since the Brown v. Board of Education decision, which ended legal and de jure segregation of schools. Why and how is school diversity still an issue today?
I think a lot of times people are shocked to hear conversations about school segregation because they think of that as something that's part of history lessons. But one of the stories that comes back to my mind of just why this is so important was a story from a couple years ago that made national headlines, even though it was really a local story, about a single mom in Akron, Ohio, who had been convicted of 2 felony charges and ended up serving jail for falsifying documents to send her daughter to school in the neighboring suburban school district. And if you take a look at the 2 schools that this mom was deciding between, trying to sneak her daughter into this other district, the Akron Public School, an urban district, was a school that was on academic watch, at risk of failure. And I think it's not an accident that that school was 95% low income. It was serving a really disadvantaged group of students, all concentrated in this district, in this school. By contrast, the suburban public school that she forged the address to get her kids into was an excellent school, academic distinction in the state, and had 20% low-income students. And yet, it was about a 5-minute drive between the 2 schools. So I think that this story made national headlines because a woman served jail time for trying to get her kid into another school, which is kind of shocking. But really, it's a really common story. Our schools are highly segregated. Often these segregated schools are really close to each other, but divided by some sort of boundary, an attendance boundary, a neighborhood boundary, or a district boundary. And too often, parents don't have an option of sending their kids to these mixed income schools. May go, in some cases, to extremes of breaking the law to try and make that happen. Because I think part of what that mother's choice shows is that it's just much more likely that diverse mixed income schools are going to be successful. And I think that there are a number of reasons why that's still the case, even though it's 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education. But really what we saw is that during the 1960s, when there was desegregation, we made strides in desegregating schools, particularly in the American South. But since then, a lot of desegregation orders have been lifted off of cities and districts. And our racial segregation in schools has increased since the 1980s. Black and Latino students in our country are now in more racially isolated schools than they were before 1980, which is pretty shocking. And I think there are a number of reasons that have contributed to that. It takes a lot of political will to make integration happen. There are also demographics that can change, that shift what it looks like in a school based on attendance boundaries. But I think probably the biggest dynamic is that not enough people and not enough districts and educators and schools have really made it a priority to come up with solutions for integrating our public schools in this new landscape.
So in terms of making this a priority, so how do we do that, right? What benefits can we speak of socioeconomic and racial diversity in schools that we should be having a conversation around?
Yeah, I think it's so important to talk about the benefits of diversity because that's what makes this something that parents and educators and political leaders are willing to fight for. Bottom line, I think there are huge academic benefits to kids for attending diverse schools, and particularly there's a lot of research around economic diversity and how having a group of kids that includes enough kids from middle class backgrounds that have social supports outside of school really affects the achievement of all kids in school. And we've known this for a long time. So going back to the 1960s, there was a big government-funded study that I'm sure some of you have heard about in education courses, the Coleman Report, that found that the #1 school-related factor that affected students' achievement was the demographics of their peers, the socioeconomic composition of their peers. So that means that a low-income student has a huge advantage of being able to attend a mixed-income school rather than having to attend a school where there are large concentrations of poverty. And we've seen this again in recent research that shows that mixed-income schools improve students' rates of learning, they improve the rates of students going to college, and this is when you're comparing students with the same socioeconomic background. So a given kid with a given background has a better chance in a school that's mixed income. And some of that has to do with the fact that mixed income schools are more likely to be able to get political capital and get resources. And so there have been a lot of efforts to bring more resources to schools with concentrated poverty that are really serving at-risk kids. And those are hugely important efforts. But it's important not to forget that it's not just about money, it's also about the peer environment. And in fact, one really interesting piece of research that I go back to again and again came from 2010, looking at students in a county in Maryland, Montgomery County. And it looked at kids who were randomly assigned to schools. So some kids were assigned, these are all low-income students in public housing, and some of them were assigned to schools that were more mixed-income schools, and then others were assigned to schools that had much greater concentrations of poverty. And they looked at the outcomes of these two groups of kids, again, randomly assigned, so it doesn't have anything to do with their families and the different efforts that they made, or with any sort of outside bias like that. Now, the kids in the mixed income schools did better than the kids in the schools with concentrated poverty, and that's not too surprising. But one thing that's especially impressive is that Montgomery County actually had a really progressive funding formula, and so they were giving these schools with concentrated poverty more money per pupil. So they were giving them more money to have more time in core subjects, to have extra training for teachers. But it was still a greater advantage for students to attend these mixed income schools. So if we want to think about how we can best serve our most at-risk students, and at the same time really get the most for the limited dollars that we have, I think it just makes so much sense to have diverse schools. I want to switch gears 1 second, since I've been mostly talking about the benefits for low-income students, is to think about, what about our middle class and more affluent students who are coming to these schools? There are huge benefits for all students of interacting with diverse groups of peers. I think there are social benefits that you all can probably think back on experiences in your own lives of the sorts of learning experiences that you have with having a chance to interact with people who bring new perspectives. But it's also critically important given the changing face of our country. We're preparing students to interact in groups that are going to reflect what our society is going to look like when they graduate and go to college and beyond. It also encourages these 21st century skills that we're so concerned about preparing our students with. You know, if you want to teach kids to be good at complex communication and to be able to talk across differences, that is best learned when you come from an environment where people are bringing in different perspectives and different backgrounds.
So given these plethora of benefits, what are some of the challenges then faced by diverse schools, either charter or traditional public?
Well, I bet anyone who's taught here before or has a teaching background knows that differentiation is hard anywhere, right? Even if you're at a school that has a population of kids that are all really coming from the same cultural and socioeconomic background, you're still going to have kids walking in the door of your classroom at all different ranges, and you have to figure out how to meet all of those needs. Well, I think that core challenge of teaching becomes even more important and more challenging in diverse schools. So if you just look at vocabulary of students, by age 3, affluent students have more than twice the vocabulary of low-income students. So you think about what it means to have a kindergarten classroom when you're bringing in kids from all of these different backgrounds. Not only are they bringing different perspectives, different understandings and lenses that you need to be able to address, but they're also coming in with all different levels of skill preparation and different levels of knowledge bringing to the table. So I think that the best diverse schools have to really rise to that challenge, figure out how to be able to differentiate really well, teach to kids at their just right level, but at the same time do that while encouraging integrated classrooms as much as possible. So, you know, I think there can be a temptation to want differentiation to work by separating kids out into different classrooms for different tracks. But I think we've seen, many of you may have had experience in larger district schools that look integrated on the outside, in terms of the school level statistics, but when you look in a classroom to classroom level, kids aren't having the same experiences. So I think that's a chief challenge and something that Blackstone Valley Prep is one of the schools that's leading and really making sure that it's not just a school that's integrated, but it's a classroom and the opportunities are really open to all students.
Now, we're going to have more people chime in on this later, but I wanted to ask you, from the advocacy policy implementation standpoint, what strategies can traditional public schools or even charter schools use in order to diversify their student population?
That's a great question. So in terms of advocacy, I think the first thing is just building this coalition of all types of stakeholders who really believe in the mission of diverse schools and that this is something that we want for our children in our country. And I think parents are an important part of this piece, and I would encourage you as teachers and educators to think about how you convey that message to families. Because I think one of the things that is often missing, especially in discussions about charter schools, since they're about parent choice, I think that people often miss that a lot of parents want diverse schools. And as soon as they think about that mission and realize that that's something that they really would like for their children, if we can provide more of those options, parents will come. And Blackstone Valley Prep's waiting list is just a great example of the demand that there is for high quality schools and high quality schools that provide a diverse environment. So I think highlighting those successes and really explaining to people of all different backgrounds why it's an advantage to attend schools in these diverse settings is crucial. And then there are also challenges to think about in terms of how you set up a school. So there's been a lot of discussion about the 4 different communities that Blackstone Valley Prep serves, and that's a great example of a creative solution to bring together districts that otherwise are really divided along economically segregated lines. And district schools, if they can be creative and come up with the willpower, can also be part of the solution. So some districts have magnet schools that work sort of in the same way that Blackstone Valley Prep does, of drawing students from multiple districts, or from within a district, but moving from different attendance boundaries with kids of different backgrounds.
Now, Jen kind of spoke to this earlier in terms of being a small state. So from a practical standpoint, how is this different in a place, like you said, the Blackstone Valley, where we're geographically pretty close to each other, to another state or school district where people live farther apart?
Well, it was fun when I was driving over here with Jen this morning. She could point out as we were passing from one community and then to another to see really how close together the 4 communities that Blackstone Valley Prep serves, which is a huge advantage, that the geographic difference between these really disparate communities in terms of socioeconomic background, they're really quite close together, which opens up the possibility for a school like Blackstone Valley Prep, where families from all 4 communities can reach a centrally located area. And that's also something that I think opens up great possibilities for this school and for other schools in Rhode Island that have a similar model in terms of reaching the next level of integration, where a school is really not only providing students with an integrated classroom setting, but building this integrated social network that they carry with them throughout. So as you're able to have families come together at school and in out-of-school settings, people make friendships and connections with people of different backgrounds in neighboring cities and towns that they wouldn't have otherwise met. And that's something that's of important civic value, both as we think about wanting to have an integrated society, but it's also something that has huge economic value. And one of the things that was a big lesson out of desegregating schools in the South is that a huge benefit that came from no longer having separate schools for Black students and white students was all of a sudden Black students had access to a new network of connections that helps with employment. And conversely, white students have access to a whole different network of social connections and being involved in different segments of the community. So I think as you think about Blackstone Valley Prep as not only creating a school community and really preparing scholars to go off to college, but also building this web of connections that in terms of the region is quite remarkable in promoting cooperation and new opportunities that might not have been there without the school.
All right, so now we're going to invite our other panelists to come on up. So we're going to have Ms. Christine Lopes-Metcalf, Ms. Tammy Johnson, and Mr. Victor Capellan come up. To the audience, guys, if you had any questions, I would ask that you please write them down. And if anything comes up, we're going to have a Q&A towards the end. And so you'll be able to ask any of the 4 panelists anything that's on your mind. I will allow them to introduce themselves. We're going to start by, just give you guys a heads up. We're going to ask you to share why you do the work that you do, introduce yourselves, where you're coming from, and kind of give the audience some perspective. I'll start off myself by saying, and Jen asked me to do so, and I'm sorry I skipped it. I was in my Oprah moment. But the reason why I do this work is actually partly on this stage, Mr. Victor Capellan, but from a personal standpoint, education irrevocably changed and saved my life. I grew up in a high poverty, single parent environment, and going to a public school and attending an Ivy League university just gave me opportunities that I would have never had otherwise. And so I wanted to give back to my community, and when I first started teaching, I taught in a highly segregated school environment where I had never seen a white student or an Asian student before. And so leaving that setting very frustrated, I actually was doing some work with Mr. Capellan, who put me in touch with hands down the most aggressive education headhunter I've ever met, Mr. Jeremy Capellan, who brought me in. And so the reason why I stay now is being in a setting that I've never seen before. And so seeing white, Black, Asian, Hispanic students interact in a way that I had never experienced was really inspirational. But we'll go ahead and pass it.
Hi everybody. My name is Christine Lopes-Metcalf. I'm the Executive Director of RICAN, which stands for the Rhode Island Campaign for Achievement Now. I'll give you a little sense of my background and then talk a little bit about why I do this work. So I grew up in Massachusetts. I did go to preschool in Pawtucket where my grandparents lived, so I've always had this connection to Rhode Island. But in Massachusetts, all of my work was political. So I went to UMass Amherst, I got the political bug. After college, I worked for SEIU 509 on their electoral campaign strategy on getting candidates elected who supported labor rights. From there, I went to go work at the State House in Massachusetts, worked for a number of people, and then I got an opportunity to work on a gubernatorial campaign, and after that, someone recruited me to go work on a campaign to get universal preschool in Massachusetts, and that was really the second but main entry for me into the education policy world from the political landscape. And they hired me because they said, we're going to run this campaign like a political campaign. You're coming off of the gubernatorial race. I knew nothing about early childhood. I'd never taught in a classroom. She said, you are going to run the kids of Massachusetts like they're your candidate. And so we did that for 4.5 years. We had some great success and great things happening in Massachusetts. And so that was really where I kind of got the bug about education policy. And then I went back to do some more political stuff. And when I came to Rhode Island, I became executive director of another organization that really worked on good government ethics reform in Rhode Island. And that was my first entry into politics in Rhode Island, which was a very good training ground. But then I decided when I was in grad school, I really want to go back to education policy, and someone, somebody that you'll see these names and hear these names in Rhode Island because they have, I think, a profound effect on the work that we do. I'd gone to talk to Anna because she was actually my officer at Common Cause, completely unrelated to education, and said, I really want to do education policy in Rhode Island. I don't want to go back to Massachusetts. Can you help me? And she said, I really think you should go check out this new charter school that's opening up in the Blackstone Valley. There's some really great things happening. And this was the very first year of Blackstone Valley Prep. And I was honest with her. I said, I'm really not a big fan of charter schools. I said, I've worked for a number of elected officials. I don't really understand them. I really want to talk about all of our kids. I don't understand why we're creating this other system of public schools. I'm not a big fan. And she's like, no, I really think you should go check the school out and then let's talk. So I actually went to go see the school, and it was the first 76 scholars and the amazing teachers that really changed and opened my mind completely about what it meant, both the racial diversity that I got to see, both the passion from the minute I walked into the school to the minute I left every single classroom. I then drilled Jeremy, I don't know if you remember, I can still see him in his office at the time because he was head of school, drilling him about the money. In the kitchen at Fatima, drilling him about the finances. I wanted to know how the money worked, I wanted to know all these different things because I was really, it had completely changed, over 15 years of what I thought. And then from there, I actually got an opportunity to go work for the mayoral academies. So I completely did a 360 on my position, but it really helped because I got to work with mayors because I had done a whole bunch of political work. I understood their lens. I understood why they were coming to this work or what they played in the political landscape. And now I got to work in education policy. And so that's kind of how I'm one of these, what we call unlikely allies or unlikely transfers or whatever it's called, but that's me. And then I got an opportunity when RICAN opened to go work on education policy again for all of our public schools, for all of our public kids, but with this lens of all of our public schools, including our public charter schools, including our mayoral academies. And so being able to provide this bridge that I'm hoping we can do is really exciting to me. So I have a very special place in my heart for BVP just because of those early days and getting everything up, but I also am very passionate about the work. The reason that I do it, I actually told this story, I can't remember if I told it maybe last week, most recently, was why I do the work I think in education and why I keep coming back to it is that when I was a freshman in high school, and I went to a public high school, in my elementary school, I was the only student of color in my community. My parents, I was eligible for free and reduced lunch in elementary school. My parents got enough money to buy a house in the suburbs, so we moved. That's what I think a lot of some families do. We moved. I was the only person of color in my elementary school. Then I get to my high school, which had, we ended up changing some policies. They changed policies, and it changed a little bit. But when I got there, my very first weeks of high school, I was tracked. I was tracked for basic education. So in that high school, in the 90s, it was tracked. There was basic, intermediate, and college track. Somehow, I have no idea how I knew, but I knew I needed to get out of that basic track. And my parents did not go to school in the United States, so they literally got me up, got me to school. That was it. They went to parent conferences, but they did not know the system. They didn't know about these things. So I don't know how I did, but I knew that I needed to get out of that basic track and I needed to get into that college track because they had always talked to me about college. It was always, you're going, doesn't matter, we don't know where you're going, but you're going. And so I figured out how to get myself from that basic track, my freshman year of high school, into the college track by literally the principal telling me I had to go to every single teacher that I needed to, and get their signature on a piece of paper to transfer me to be able to take those college classes, freshman in high school. And from there on, I think it's always stuck with me that I knew how to navigate the system. And if there are people in our public school system that know how to navigate, they'll get through. But we need to stop that. We need to have a system that you don't need to navigate. You need a system that's going to support all kids wherever they are. And that's kind of, I think, in the end, what keeps me going at those really hard days of why I do this work. So no families have to navigate anymore. So.
Hello, I'm Tammy Johnson, and I'd like to start by welcoming you all to the BVP family. I am a BVP mom. I have 3 scholars here at ES1. I have twins going into 4th grade and my youngest going into 3rd grade. A little bit about my history. I live in Central Falls, and when my twins were ready to start kindergarten, at the time I wasn't satisfied with what our public school system had to offer. With 3 starting in 2 years, I couldn't afford private school. Luckily, BVP had opened the year before, and my scholars were chosen in the lottery. And when I saw what the school had to offer, we asked why we do the work. I couldn't not do the work. To see what my children have and my neighbor doesn't have is not okay with me. And I think a big part of why we're all here is because we want to see every child in Rhode Island have this type of education, whether it be at a charter, at a private school, or at a traditional public, which, being from Rhode Island, we are starting to see, it's inevitable, these charters are raising the bar for traditional public schools. We see it happening. We know that our work is not going unnoticed. So back to my history. Once my children started school here, I had been in banking previously. I was very interested in the work being done here. I spent a lot of time volunteering here, and I think I needed to learn more about education in Rhode Island. I went to school in the Central Falls School District as a teacher assistant. I started at that point to spend time at our middle school. I wanted to really be able to compare and figure out where my place was in education. Currently, I'm working for the Mayor's Office of Children, Youth, and Learning in Cumberland. I work with 3- and 4-year-olds in early literacy and math. I think the earlier we start, the better, and that's why I'm glad that we are a K-12 school. So there, again, being in the Cumberland community, I've seen how, as much as we tend to be controversial, the bar is being raised. They've since gone to full-day kindergarten, and we caused some waves, but we're making progress for our scholars and for children around the state. So the reason I do this work is because, again, I want to see all the children of Rhode Island have what my children get here from you. And advocacy, as far as advocacy goes, I think that I learned that from you. So Christine has held workshops for our parents to teach us how to advocate for our own children. And I felt the need to take that one step further and fight for all of our children, for all of Rhode Island's children. I don't know how it happened, it's kind of a big blur, but I found myself on the Central Falls City Council. Again, I think it was just a logical next step to have a voice for our children. So thank you, I really do.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes a todos. My name is Victor Capellan, and right now I'm the engagement director for Mass Insight Education. It's a nonprofit consulting firm in Boston. I've been there for starting my 4th week, actually today. My work at Mass Insight is to create what we call the college success communities, and it's working with school districts around the country in looking at how do you create the types of schools that Tammy's describing for her children, right? How do you make sure that all parents have options in their neighborhoods to send their kids through a K-12 school system that's in their neighborhood, that's high achieving, and that can get their child to higher education. And so my work is going around and working with different school districts in finding ways to do that, both utilizing the academic work, organizational, and looking at how the school system is set up, and also how do you involve the community, including the parents, community organizations, businesses, because we all have to do this together. So that's the work that I do today. But prior to that, I was a deputy superintendent of schools here in Central Falls. And I was in charge of the transformation at the high school for the last 4 years. I worked with, thank you, and I'm proud of the work that we did, and I'm proud to highlight Mr. Gibson, who was one of our teachers at the high school. He did an amazing job there, so congrats, Jeremy, on getting Mr. Gibson. But the reason why I'm very proud of the work that we're doing in Central Falls is we're starting to turn the corner. We're starting to see some of our students getting the education they deserve. We're starting to see parents, business, community, everyone becoming involved in this work. And the reason why I'm involved is because Jeremy is a great partner to Central Falls, and Central Falls is a great partner to BVP. And so I think that that's the kind of relationship that we really, at least over the last 4 years, we have enjoyed. Dr. Gallo has been very open in terms of saying, these are all my children. Some go to BVP, some go to Segway, some come to our schools, but they're all my children, and I will do whatever I need to make sure they get the best education. And so that's the kind of work that I was proud to be a part of. And for a number of reasons, I decided to look at this work from a different perspective. Prior to being in Central Falls, I was the assistant superintendent of schools in Fall River. And before that, I was a principal in a high school in Brooklyn, and bringing myself back to Providence, where I started working in the Providence school systems a number of years ago. And so the work that I've been doing is looking for places where I think I can make a difference, where I think I can make a contribution. And I found that this work really blends a couple of things that I'm very passionate about. Some of the work that Jonathan and I were doing together as well is around politics and education. Where do those two worlds sort of find themselves? And that's the other sort of hat that you will usually see me wearing, being very involved in politics, especially in Providence and in different parts of the state. And don't forget, you have to register to vote by the 9th. So if you're planning to vote, please make sure to do so. And as teachers, I think it is important for every single one of us to be active in the political system as well, because it impacts us tremendously. And so make sure that if you have not registered, that you do so by the 9th of August. My story, the reason why I do this work, I remember the first time I set foot on a college campus. I was a junior at Central High School in Providence, and I signed up for something that was going on, and my friend said, we should go to this thing. It was Search Weekend at URI, and I signed up, and even though I was in the ESL program, they took me and one other friend, and so the two of us went with the students who were in the college track. I was the ESL in the basement, and but somehow I got on that list and I was able to go. And I remember the moment I stepped foot on that campus. They dropped us off, and when we were in the quad, I looked around and I said, oh my God, this is where I have to be. I have to find a way to get here. And I went back to Central, and I studied the hardest I'd ever studied. I did anything I could to make sure that I got out of ESL, went into regular classes, and make sure that I was eligible for URI. And I did so through the talent development program that helped me get to URI. For a number of years, I worked at URI, I taught at URI, and did 2 masters at URI. And so I really think that that moment shaped me. And the reason that I continue to do this work is because of what it meant for my family. Not only did my life change after I was able to graduate from college, but my entire family. And so that social mobility, upward social mobility that I saw that we were able to achieve as a family, that is what I want for other children. I came from the Dominican Republic in the 8th grade to Roger Williams Middle School without speaking a word of English. And so I got to Roger Williams, and every single day I see students coming, whether they come from another country or they come from down the street, they're all looking for that same opportunity. And so I said, what better work can I do than to give other students that same opportunity that I have? So that's why I do what I do, and so far I'm enjoying it. I am having a great time doing it, and I have found a way where politics and education meet, and it is a lot of fun. Thank you.
I'll try to talk loud so we don't have to play hot potato with the mic. Whatever they're saying 10 times more important than what I'm saying. But from each of your individual perspectives, perspective, what do BVP teachers need or should know about the work ahead in Rhode Island for an education?
So I'll say two things. The first one is you have to be a great teacher to your students. First and foremost, that is your number one job, is to be the best you can be in that classroom to every single one of those students. And so every time I talk to teachers is around what can you do to make yourself even better than you are today so that your students have the best teacher in that classroom. That is the number one thing that I think that we all can do, is be the best teacher you can be. And second is then how do you impact each other? I think that by each other I don't mean just here at BVP, but also your colleagues across the state. You have a very big voice, and even though you saw up here that is 4% of our students go to charter schools, the conversation is around how are charter schools impacting public schools. And so you have a big voice because you are in a place where you're seeing the work, you're seeing how your children are impacted, how their families are impacted. And so I would say that don't be shy about sort of getting out there and being an advocate for your children here. The conversation we're having around equity is one that is near and dear to my heart, and I think that when you're able to see what you have done here at BVP and the diversity that you have brought together of your scholars and of your staff as well, I think that is critical to make sure that you are able to continue having that conversation outside of these walls. And so that's the second thing that I would say, is make sure that you have these conversations with your colleagues outside, because what I think is coming, Jonathan, especially this year, because we're having such a change in terms of landscape, of a political landscape, from the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, mayors, everyone is sort of across the state. So we have an opportunity to be able to impact education policy in the state. And as new players come into different positions, some of them may be in new players completely altogether, that is an opportunity for us to impact. So again, I look at the opportunity and what's coming down as you having a very big voice in terms of how politics impacts education.
So as far as being a teacher here at BVP, I mentioned to Mr. Cabian when we were sitting in the corner as you had us stretching. You never know what you'll find yourself doing here. I have come to volunteer to make copies. I made a music video while I was here. You never know. Yeah, she's with me. And honestly, you'll think back and go, I remember that woman saying that. I can't believe I'm doing this right now. But that's the way BVP is. I remember at my enrollment meeting when my twins got in, Mr. Chipetta said, you can all get rid of your TVs now to the families. And my daughters were like, what did he just say? You too, you can all get rid of your TVs, there's going to be no time. At BVP, whether you're a scholar, a parent, staff, teacher, you're all in. And yeah, welcome. I think that, again, at BVP, and this is what I think really sets us apart from a lot of schools, we're a team. We're all in this together, and I believe that. I mean, I can't do it without you, and I don't believe that you can do it without the parents. So we will bug you. Thank you for giving us your phones till 9 p.m. Even if you don't have my scholar, I will still bug you. A lot of you know me. You don't have to have my scholar in order for me to be calling you about something. So I think that as far as the BVP landscape, that's something that we have that's very different, that I think we all benefit from, the scholars especially. As far as the Rhode Island landscape, you had mentioned it's new. The political landscape right now is very new, and I think that we're learning to mesh the politics and the education forums in Rhode Island, and I think that it's going to greatly benefit everyone, and it should be interesting to watch this play out. And again, I never testified at the State House until I was a BVP parent. When my children won the lottery, I didn't realize I did too, because BVP has affected my life as much as my children's. And you will find yourself at the State House, and you will find yourself as a whole, as a BVP family, fighting to change the education landscape in Rhode Island. Good luck.
I'll definitely echo everything that's already been said, because it's so true. The two things I probably would highlight is one is that you're getting kids from all different backgrounds, all different places, all different experiences, very different than almost any school in the state. What I would really strongly urge, and I know it's going to happen because I know from Jeremy that the first criteria to even being in this room is that you have to be mission aligned. Like, I know that. So I know that you're mission aligned. I know that you're an exceptional teacher, just already knowing that how passionate you are, is that you keep the bar really high for every single scholar. Like, that is the one thing that we're trying to do across the state, is that that bar is high, regardless of where they're coming from, that you're gonna double down and you're gonna have a team and you're gonna try to help get those scholars where they need to be, but that consistently, every single one of them is at that same bar. And however you're gonna get them there might look different, but that really is so important. And the second part connected to that is that you guys are part of history in Rhode Island, you are, and you are changing the minds of a lot of what's going on because of that work. We are changing kind of what's happening. So the eyes are on, BVP, on the mayoral academies, because to some it's an experiment, like, can this work? Both the socioeconomic part of it, like, we now, there's scholars who are now going into middle school who are here from K, and then you have a high school coming. Like, it's gonna start to change and new questions and new things are gonna pop up, but you're part of a bigger thing. And so on those days that it gets really hard, I just want you to know that while you guys are doing the hardest work of all of us, that there is a whole group of people out there that's really trying to make it easier outside these walls for you. It's hard there, and it's really hard where you guys are, but there are people supporting you, there are people encouraging you, so you may read things that sounds like people are not supportive of what's going on in this state, but there is a lot of people out there that are very supportive and are rooting for you and are supporting you, so just remember that.
I'll zoom out just a little to talk nationally, since my work really looks at stuff going on across the nation, and I would echo what Christine said about eyeballs being on Blackstone Valley Prep, because what you guys are doing is really unique, and I think people are interested in the model. Some people are skeptical of the model, and so showing the valuable, successful results that you all have is crucial. But I would also say, it's although it's something rare, it's also something that some other charter schools have made part of their mission to really focus on making diversity part of their central goal of their school. I don't know of another school that has the same mix as Blackstone Valley Prep, and I think it's a really great model that you guys have here. But I would also encourage you, as you're talking about your work with other people, and if you learn about other charter schools that share parts of your model, to explore that as well, because I think it's really interesting to see where Blackstone Valley Prep fits in the landscape of different schools. And if you're talking to other friends and colleagues who are educators elsewhere, you might find that you have a lot in common with teachers who've taught in Achievement First schools or in Yes Prep schools. You might also find then that other parts of your experience are going to be in common with teachers who've taught in other charter schools, some charter schools that really prioritize diversity. Like, there are a couple in DC, there's E.L. Haynes Public Charter School, Capital City Public Charter School. So I would just encourage you to talk about your work and the unique parts of your model, and also listen and get a sense for how Blackstone Valley Prep fits in a really interesting and unique space in this landscape.
Thanks. Wow. It seems like there's a lot of work to be done, and it's almost as if we were in a room full of people crazy enough to go into their own rooms and be responsible for 25 lives. Weird. But so this next question is for Ms. Johnson, but I would love you all to chime in after. Congresswoman, as a parent, as a BVP parent, advocate of great schools, when opposition tries to blame charter schools for lack of funding or creaming the crop of the top kids, how do you respond?
It's simply not true, and I can speak to this as a parent, just being in the building. We see children receiving special services. I try not to divulge too much information, but I'll see, children that it's obvious it's costing the school a lot of money to have these children receive these special services. Also, as someone who's done a lot of advocacy and outreach for the school, I'm the person walking the street, passing out applications, inviting people to open houses. I applied for my own children, so I know in that application There's no testing in there. There's nothing in there that's giving the school any information on whether or not my children is the cream of the crop. So I think that that's a battle we have fought for a long time, and we will continue to fight. And I mean, we just have to let that roll off our backs and continue to do what we do, and to speak to those people who doubt us and show them that we truly do have a little bit of everybody, racially, socioeconomically, and definitely a lot of children with special needs. And again, I think that just continuing to do the work and showing them who we are and continuing to show them our numbers, and eventually we'll get there.
Well, I would say in terms of the work that, and let me sort of talk from my Central Falls experience, the way that we looked at the work was really to say, these are the students that we have here in front of us, and these are the students that we're going to focus on. And so really the goal for us and with our teachers was just, these are the students who are here, and that's what we focus on. A lot of times there are people who will look at it and try to sort of say, well, it's not fair, it's this, and we can have that conversation, but for me it was important to maintain the focus on the kids who were sitting in front of us every single day, who are coming to Central Falls schools every single day. And so that's the way that we addressed it. You know, when everybody got into the whole kneecap this and kneecap that, what we said 3 years ago when we saw that coming was, we need to do whatever we can to make sure that our children are prepared. And Dan was one of those teachers that stayed after school a number of days to make sure that he provided that additional support. And so we said, whatever it takes, whatever we have to do, we will provide that for our children. And so rather than getting caught up in all of the political conversations, we said, we're just going to stay focused on the children. So the same thing with this question. 96% of the students go to public schools in the state, and so there needs to be a focus in saying, these children are in front of us, we focus on them. You have a group of students here in front of you, you focus on those students and give them the best. There's a conversation that's going to continue to go on, and yes, we have to be a part of it, and yes, we have to contribute to it, without forgetting that Tammy's children need the same exact thing as her neighbors, and so your job as teachers is to stay, that's your number one priority. Everything else, I think, comes second.
I think I'll just add quickly, because this is definitely a good example of, and I'm going to take a wild stab, and I was not here, but I'm going to think and hope that when Mayor McKee talked to you earlier, he talked about the education journey and the political journey. And that's what BVP is that it's a kind of a convergence of the two coming together. That the work that you guys are doing is the educational part of this journey, and making sure that those expectations and that the scholars are meeting those bars and doing all of that. The political journey is the money. It's just the reality that we're living in right now, that's political. It's how money flows, what happens in our state. And one of the most recent statistics, RICAN works on education policy and research, we went back and looked at the NEA has released some new data points and some different things about spending, and this year Rhode Island was 5th in the country, we were 5th or 6th in the country for the amount that we spend on our education system. So the question is, we have a lot of money and investment financially in our system, but there are things that need to change and some policies that need to change to make sure that the money is actually getting to the places that the decisions are being made closest to our students. Like, that's the missing part of this, and so that is a political conversation. You will hear that out there about money flowing and what happens, and in the end, those dollars belong to the public school student. They really should be following the public school student. In my world, they would follow them all the way to the classroom. So those dollars fall all the way there, so that's where the most impact happens. But right now, we're in a place where it doesn't happen that way, and so we're trying to change the conversation. So BVP is changing the conversation in the mayoral academies about what our schools should look like, how we should do things, our governance models. We now want to try to change the conversation about funding, but it's happening. But that's what I would say is there.
I would just add that one of the big ideas behind starting charter schools in the first place over 2 decades ago was this idea of laboratory schools, that you can try things that aren't being done in district schools. And so instead of focusing on a conversation that's really about competition, thinking about focusing on the fact that this freedom from the same rules that district schools have to follow is letting Blackstone Valley Prep try some really creative and different things around the academic model and around diversity. And I had a great conversation earlier today with Elsa and Mike from Rhode Island Mayoral Academies, and they were talking about a video showcasing some of the techniques that Blackstone Valley Prep uses for attracting and training and retaining teachers. Highlighting practices like that is a great way to communicate with other schools, not only charter schools, but also district schools. And so I think thinking about a conversation is how can educators and school leaders, regardless of your setting, share what's working and learn from each other.
So to give us a kind of bigger perspective and take us back to the state as a whole, Mr. Cabian, this question is directed to you, but again, please feel free to chime in, guys. From your experience with multiple districts and organizations, what in your opinion are the, some teacher talk here, the glows and grows of the larger public education sector in Rhode Island?
So I would say, as I looked at the work, both having the opportunity to work in a school system like New York, and you mentioned 1.1 million children, and then coming back to Rhode Island and looking at the work here. Now, my work would take me to New Orleans, where I'll be leaving this afternoon to go there, to Cleveland, to Quaboag, Massachusetts, where I was this morning. And so I'm looking at this work now from all these different perspectives, and I think the glows continue to be, we have a number of dedicated teachers who continue to come every single day and do their best. And I think that that's where a lot of our investment, both in the work that we did in Central Falls and now in Mass Insight, is looking at how can we provide teachers with the supports and the structures and the systems that they need to be able to do their work. And I think the grow is right in that same area, is around we need to make sure that we focus the money flowing as close to as possible to the classrooms, that the way that we are providing professional development, for example, is not sort of in this format every single time, but that there are very specific ways of working with teachers, that their needs are different. Just how we differentiate for children, we need to differentiate for adults. And so I think that that's where the grow continues to be. And looking at it, that is not and this or that. So I think the biggest sort of I'm going to call it danger that we have right now is these extremes that we have sort of carved for ourselves. And people are running either all the way to the left or all the way to the right, whatever that may be for them, and finding these extremes that are not helpful for the teachers and certainly not helpful for children and their families. And so for me, I think that is the next big level of work, is finding what does this common ground look like. It's the work that I saw Jeremy and Dr. Gallo doing together, finding middle ground in terms of how do we provide support for our teachers. Karina and I email back and forth in terms of here is some PD and some things that we can do together. So for me, that is the goal. I think that that's where we have a lot of growth and we can get a lot from it, is where we find that sweet spot, if you will, of what are some of the things that are going to benefit teachers and their children in the classroom.
Oh, so sorry about that. So glow is kind of like the positive thing, like, oh, that's awesome, killing it. Grow is when you gotta grow, do better. All right.
I wasn't positive. I didn't want to assume anything. I think just because I've had the opportunity to kind of go across the state and work both with public charter schools, but then also talk to district schools about different things. And I think one of the glows is that there's amazing stuff happening across the state. There just is. There's amazing stuff happening here in Blackstone Valley, in this school. There's amazing stuff happening in Central Falls. There's amazing stuff happening in South County and Newport. There is. But there are pockets, and the grow, I hope, is, or what they have to kind of grow out of, is that there's a cloud that is looming over everything, which is just, a lot of our economic situation, a lot of policies that are coming that are intended to help and support, but need to be tweaked along the way. And so one example I have is I was talking with a principal in Pawtucket about the teacher evaluation system. And this is someone who I know believes in a lot of the things that we believe in, that is mission aligned, that believes every kid can get there, all those things. And really, he helped me think about the teacher eval system, saying, it's great, we need to be evaluating our teachers, we need to be evaluating our principals, but the current system needs to be tweaked, it needs to be refined, because we haven't shifted things around. And so RICAN was supporting a piece of legislation, not to change it, but to kind of halt some of the big changes. And he was in support of the bill, and I was like, wow, you know, it helped open my eyes that, like, okay, we need to figure out how to get there, because there isn't, to what Victor said, there isn't a left, a right, a definitive answer to anything. So the glows are that there's some great things happening. We just need to figure out how to tell more people about them and how to make it not just pockets of excellence, but some real kind of across the board thing.
All right, now we'd love to open it up to the audience to ask any questions you may have for any of the panel members. It could be just a broad question that any of them could answer, or a specific question if you'd like. Feel free to. Mr. Speaks.
I'll speak some of the cultural at the high school, and this question is for Ms. Hart. Earlier when you were speaking, you mentioned that segregation was rising in schools amongst Hispanics and Blacks, and I was curious to find out why that was so.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple dynamics to think about. One is residential segregation, that measures of that over the past few decades in our country show that our neighborhoods are increasingly segregated. We also have fewer middle-class neighborhoods than we used to. Concentrations of poverty are just on the rise. And that also plays out in terms of racial segregation and those demographic patterns. So that's one thing that's just happening. And you have residential segregation that sometimes creates schools that are also segregated. I don't want to end the conversation there, though, because I get really frustrated that I think people want to give schools, let schools off the hook for being segregated because our neighborhoods are segregated. But the truth is, you can have integrated schools a lot of the time, not all the time, even if you have segregated neighborhoods. And you can also have segregated schools even when the neighborhoods aren't even that segregated. So I was learning a little bit earlier today about Cumberland and the way that district schools in Cumberland are divided, and how there are elementary schools that have really different economic segregation, and that just has to do with where you divide the district. And if you divide it along the same line as that neighborhood segregation, then you're going to be sending all of the low-income kids to one school and all of the more affluent kids to another school. If you choose to divide the district differently, you could really fight against that residential segregation. And again, the same patterns that you see for students of color. And I would point out in particular, I think one of the reasons why this is so important is you may hear people talk about double segregation. And really what you see is that students of color frequently face both kinds of segregation. So Black and Latino students now are more likely than they were in 1980 to be in schools where where the white population is very tiny or non-existent. And that also is very likely to be schools that have high concentrations of poverty. And because of the implications that has for resources and for the opportunity to interact with students from different backgrounds, that's just this double disadvantage that we really have to work to unseat.
Mr. Santos-Silva.
I just wanted to throw out there that because schools are segregated, it shouldn't release a community from its responsibility to educate the kids in those schools. So it is important for schools like BVP to exist, to prove to the larger community that Black, brown, white, Asian students can learn together. But even so, if we have a school that's all Black or brown, as a community, we need to hold our legislators, our district leaders, our principals accountable to say that just because these kids don't look like my own, doesn't mean that I'm off the hook from educating them appropriately. Not really a question, just I get it out there.
Mr.
I'm Mr. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm Mr. Hartnett. I'll be a new teacher at the high school. And I had a question. We spent a lot of time talking about sort of integrating socioeconomic classes and different racial groups into a school. And I want to know if there have been any surprising or interesting or exciting results on different forms of different gaps. Are we increasing the number of men we're sending to college or the number of young women that we have in mathematics and science?
That's a great question, and I'll be curious to see about specific data from Blackstone Valley Prep as your students progress too. I would say, so most of my research has looked at both racial achievement gaps and socioeconomic achievement gaps, and particularly socioeconomic achievement gaps since those are twice the size of race-based achievement gaps in our country. And so that is one place that you've seen a huge effect. But other sorts of measures, and this isn't maybe the exact same sort of gaps that you're talking about, but there's also research on outcomes for students who have the chance to attend diverse schools in the way that it affects their choices later in life. That students who attend racially and economically diverse schools are more likely to live in racially and economically diverse neighborhoods after college. And so if you think about what that means for our economies and the strength of our different communities as we're moving forward, there are really long-term implications of giving students this chance to have a diverse setting.
Mr. I missed your last name?
Tedeschi.
Tedeschi.
Tedeschi, yeah.
All right.
So I wrote mine down because otherwise I'm not walking about. So, I mean, obviously a huge step towards this intentional diversity that Ms. Potter was talking about is the opportunity for school choice. I think like across the board, not just certain types of schools that you can elect to go to. But oftentimes there's those laws that restrict or deny completely that school choice. So my question is more like, I guess for the more political-minded people up there, what are some concrete steps that we can take to create opportunities for school choice, to push back on organizations and groups that have such a strong voice and influence, such as teachers' unions that often tend to lobby against or are skeptical of school choice?
It's a good question, because I do think that we now need to get into new conversations in Rhode Island about what choice means, and beyond just, I mean, right now public charters are highlighted because they really are. We have state schools, we have career tech schools, so we do actually have some schools of choice, public schools of choice, but it's really right now focused on public charters. One of the conversations that RICAN is starting to try to have more vocally is around inter-district choice. And what that means is Massachusetts has had for over 20 years. I went to a school, what I talked a little bit about was that, I went to a school, an elementary school, where I was the only student of color. By middle school, in the same community. When I got to high school, there were very few students of color in my high school, and it started to change as I got older, because my school was a school of choice. So I was in a suburban community, but if we had open seats, students from our surrounding communities could apply and go to our school. And so there are pockets of that in Massachusetts where it exists. This is public to public. This is, or traditional to traditional. This is not, part of the charter network. And now those are the conversations we're starting to try to have in Rhode Island, because we believe that will start to change some of the dynamics. And again, the political challenging part of that conversation is the money. And we've gotten people who are actually, there's always these layers, it's like an onion around school choice, and where the onion stops and where people's comfortability level goes. And you have people who are comfortable with that idea. Barrington, which is a community over on the Bay, wanted to try to do this at one point. They said, we have buildings, we have funding, we have a setup, a number of teachers for X number of spots. We might have maybe 20 that are not going to be filled by our students. Could we tuition in? Could we do different things? And there was a big public kind of outcry and pushback towards that from a whole bunch of things. So they didn't do it, but they had started to have that conversation. So the policy part of it, we'd like to see something like that start to happen and go. I'd like to quickly talk about the politics of it a little bit. Just because, especially which connects to more diverse. We talked a lot tonight about the benefits, and I think a lot of us in the room really support the idea of diverse public schools. There is a whole segment who does not want that to happen. And so we've seen that with mayoral academies, and so there is this political, social part of change that needs to happen. So we tried to, there was one particular application which really did push communities together, and some members of those communities were not as accepting of that. And the conversations, again, onions and layers of conversation about why people didn't support that particular application. But there was a layer that, there were public conversations about those kids. We do not want those kids in our schools. You know, we do certain things, and so we have these layers that we have to work on and figure out as a society. I think a little bit to what John was talking about our schools and about who we are and that kind of stuff, but I think our schools can help do that. So there's those different layers. So those pieces.
The quote was from an elected councilman.
I'm trying to be political, but
An elected councilman said, "We don't want those kids crossing the border from Providence into our community." That's what we're up against. That's real.
yes, that was quoted, yeah.
I think that the first step in overcoming this is things like our district charter compact with Central Falls, proving that it doesn't have to be us against them. We can all learn from each other. I was there that night to speak in favor of that, and I was very proud as a Central Falls resident, a Central Falls High School graduate, as someone who's as involved as I am at BVP, to know that we were all willing to work together. As far as the diversity goes, with the work I'm doing right now for the RISE Academy, I'm doing some outreach in those 3 communities for the RISE Academy currently. My nephew graduated last year from Barberville High School, and I've had this conversation with him. The 4 years he was there was one black family, and there were no Latinos. And that's not reality. I mean, I find that disturbing. I know that's not the kind of environment I want to raise my children in. My children come from Central Falls. They're biracial. They can have their friend Jessica, who lives in a $500,000 house in Lincoln, and they can have their friend Jose, who lives in a 3rd floor apartment in Central Falls. They don't see that. They see Jessica and Jose, their friends from BVP. And I think that it's going to take, again, there will be pushback, for a long time. And I hope I see the day where all the schools are working together for the benefit of the children, for all of the children.
So I'll say in terms of that work, I call them equity champions. And it's really something that we started doing at the high school in Central Falls, and having the conversation with Ana Cana Morales, Jeremy, a bunch of us, just really going out there and doing this kind of work and doing these kinds of, having these conversations. And so this equity champions is really people who understand what the issues are. And so when you go back home tonight, you're able to have the conversation with someone with a little bit more information. You're able to sort of influence one another. And so I think it's one of the long-term ways of doing it is through building these equity champions and having these conversations. The short and more difficult way, but the one we need to work on, is the political way. And so, like I said earlier, I think that we do have some opportunities in that intra-district kind of work will be great. We do have some opportunities with some of the elected officials that will be coming up in the next year or so. So we got to continue to do the work. And in terms of the districts, like I said earlier, I was very proud to see what's happening in Central Falls, and I know that that work is going to continue. And really, the work is around how do we create these high poverty, high achievement schools, because for some of the families, for some of the schools, that's the neighborhood that they're in. And so you're absolutely right when you said, you can't excuse the school just because they're in a poor neighborhood. Well, you're going to have, poor results. No, you can be in a poor neighborhood and still have high achieving schools. And so I think that's the goal of the work as well.
I'm going to double back, sorry. Mr. Tedeschi, is it?
Yes.
I just want to thank you for your question, because believe me, you won't have to look for it. They will find you ways to fight this fight. I know I didn't come to BVP looking for it, but here I am. And there are times where the teachers and staff are called upon, and the families and supporters in general are called upon to do things like testify at hearings for new mayoral academies, or at the State House when they are on us for something. So believe me, there will be opportunities, and we'll all learn together how to stand together and support what we all believe in. Thank you.
Yes, Miss.
I'm Miss Douglas.
Miss Stellas.
Amanda Joy. So I originally wrote this question for Hallie, but as you've all spoken, I've kind of heard an echoing sentiment of alienation in your school when you were one of the Latino students or a person of color or struggling. And so I'm curious what are some reflections that you have about what is the responsibility of the educator in the classroom once this mixed community is achieved, right? Because I think that's like the first
I'll say something from a research perspective and would love to pass the mic to. So I think it's hugely important that teachers in diverse settings are valuing the background of all students in the classroom, and also creating ways for kids to talk about those differences, and to really bring their background to the table rather than pretending that we don't see background, but really embracing that the different perspectives and the different cultures and experiences that students are bringing into the classroom. And then the other thing that I would stress is that as educators, you can guide students in the way that they interact with others, and there can really be an opportunity to help students build friendships across differences. It's important to have friend groups who share some of your experiences. That's been shown to really increase students' perseverance, particularly at the college level even. So that is one thing that's important, but it's also really valuable to make friends who are coming from different places and different backgrounds. So I think as you're a teacher thinking about the way that you group students or the way that you guide students to interact with one another, how can you encourage them to have positive conversations about their backgrounds, that also at the same time are introducing them to differences, and doing that in a really positive way where they can ask questions and share in a safe context.
I think that was a great question. It was really good. I'm still thinking about it because, again, this is from the non-educator practical, that part of it, but definitely from what we've seen in Rhode Island, what's happening across the state, being alert to it. And I think we're all human and we all do things and we all react and we all have things, but if you start to see patterns of things or you start to see things, just being alert and conscious of it is a huge step in the right direction. So we've talked, and even my organization is having this whole conversation about socioeconomics versus racial diversity. And we're really having some strong conversations about when we're doing our planning, when we're doing our things, and how do you balance these different things. And I pushed back a little bit saying, socioeconomics is so important. And they said, we understand it's important, but the racial things that are happening in our schools is also, gets lost. And one of the stats in Rhode Island that we've been looking at is around the American Civil Liberties Union has put out a report about suspension rates. And so you have suspension rates of students of color in communities where they are 5 or 6 students. But the proportion by which they are suspended is so much higher than everybody else. And so it's one of those things where until we start to point out those trends, point out those things, I don't know if educators know that it's happening because they're in their classroom, they're just doing their thing. But when we start to point those out, so just being alert to it, and just knowing and talking with your peers and looking for some of those trends or starting to look for them together would be really helpful. Because I feel like that would really start to shine a light on things.
My only comment on this is I've been a parent at the school for 4 years now, and I've seen it working. So you have the best of the best to learn from. So whatever they're doing is working. So learn from them and keep doing it.
So I will say 4 things. First, it is a great responsibility. So once you achieve it, then what next? What happens? And so I will say the first one is yourself, and being aware, being knowledgeable about the work that you're doing, and also modeling it and showing them and learning from one another and learning from a diverse community. So yourself being the first one. The next one is making sure that that's found in your curriculum, in your lessons, in your textbooks, and that you're utilizing the most up-to-date resources that you can find to make sure that they are also they see themselves in the curriculum. The third one is utilizing what's around you. I mean, you are in an incredibly diverse community, and 10 minutes any which way from here will put you in a very different place. And so utilizing the community that you're in to make sure that the children take advantage of that as well. And then finally, the children themselves, making sure that you see them as value added, as assets, and that they're not coming in as empty vessels, blank canvases, that they do have a lot to offer as well, and utilizing their own background, their own stories, and that can just have such an impact on the rest of your children as well.
This is not related to that question, but I feel like I know the clock is coming, and so I wanted to make sure I make this last plea. I just want to echo what Victor talked about. This is the political side of me. the elections are coming. So if you're not registered already in Rhode Island, if you're new to Rhode Island, if you've been here for a while, we strongly encourage you to register to vote. The other thing that's going to happen, and the reason I want to talk about it a little bit is because you're going to hear it over the next couple of weeks as you're going, and your parents and your families, the importance of voting is just vital. It's really important that you do it. This year in Rhode Island, it will be the first time that photo IDs are required. It is not just an ID, it is a photo ID, and there's a very limited number of documents that you can use to vote. So one, for all of yourselves, just know that is a new thing in Rhode Island. It's the first time it's going to happen. For many of your parents and your families, as you're hearing about elections, this is not for or against the policy itself, but it's the reality, so I want to make sure people know it, that you please encourage them to also know that, because it's very important. So that was just my last little pitch.
I know you didn't ask me, but I just want to chime in. I really do appreciate that question. This is my first year out of the classroom, and it's something that I thought about a lot. I read a quote recently that said, when people tell me they're colorblind, they're actually telling me they don't see me. And so thinking about it in that perspective, I think that applies to class in general, also, and understanding the real world we live in versus the space we create in our classrooms. And so I think being conscious of it is a great first step. So just thank you. And then I would also like to, I know we haven't normed on this as an organization yet, so eventually I guess we'll decide either snaps or claps, but please either snap or clap it up for our panelists here.